Today, I'm going to walk you through the methodology in a very simplistic way with a very basic conducting an event study analysis for just one stock, and then you can extend it for as many as stocks you want as a part of your sample study. But this is the step which is important for the event study because the basic regression has to be run on every form level or every level of the unit that you are considering. So as I covered in the last session, that the application of the event study methodology is mostly in the corporate finance and finance literature compared to the economics as such, because the availability of the information and the adjustment of the information into the stock prices is a phenomenon and the characteristic of the financial markets. So this study is applicable when you have, the new information coming in, and that information is unanticipated for the investors who are trading in the market, so who are going to react to that information. So you need to have that kind of a setup. So somebody has to react to the news, and that should ultimately affect essentially the moment in the stock price. Okay, so that's called stock price reaction. So it could be overreaction, underreaction, whatever you want to capture. So essentially, the overreaction and underreaction to will be observed for a short interval of time, and we will see that that time interval varies from form to form, and the nature of information as well. So these are the essentially the factors. So sometimes the information takes a longer time to get adjusted in terms of the new prices. Sometimes it is more instantaneous. So depending on the reaction, so one way to understand the event study is what kind of reaction do you see with respect to the particular information. So what we do with respect to one form, you can easily extend it with respect to a sample of forms. Okay, so everything in a sample of forms is essentially in terms of the average of normal return, cumulative average of normal returns, and stuff like that. So everything gets averaged over the forms, and the t statistics and other non-parametric statistics, all the tests will be conducted accordingly. So that's the only difference, that whether you are applying the test of significance for essentially an independent every form specific abnormal return and cumulative abnormal return, or for the overall sample. If you want to make inference, then you have to essentially translate these parameters to the form, to the sample level. So that's the only difference, and all those formulas are covered in the last session, so you can easily apply those. So I'm going to do it for one stock just to show you how to do it. And I have kind of, prepared an exercise for you in simple Excel, okay? Because not, and the same thing you will be able to do much faster if you use a kind of software like SAS or Stata, or for that matter. But here we will essentially go step by step. So you see, let me give a background. So this is the very basic data, and what this stock is in picture is essentially Yes Bank, and all last few years of time, right? And more recently from 2019. So Yes Bank has been in the news quite lately for its engagement into the evergreening practices with the lenders, with the borrowers whom they favored, and like the recent arrest of Avanta Group's promoter, essentially, who's Gautam Thapar. So that was also in relationship to the Yes Bank, because they were favored in terms of providing and sanctioning loan from the Yes Bank. Okay, and they ultimately misused those loans. So, but the focus here is essentially Yes Bank. Okay, who is essentially issuing the loan. So what I've done is, I'm going to focus on a particular announcement. I'll come to that shortly. So just to give you an idea, so I have downloaded essentially the stock price stock prices for Yes Bank from CMI Provis. Okay, so standard data source for stock prices that we use in finance. So my dates are essentially 1st March 2019 to essentially 31st March 2020. Okay, so I'm just kind of nearly 1 year of data I'm just focusing on, right? So I have downloaded essentially the stock prices for Yes Bank. So that is indicated in column B, and these are all adjusted closing price. Okay, so usually in finance we take the adjusted closing price, which is adjusted for all the dividend payments or stock split, whatever it is. So the price is already adjusted for that. So we don't really go for, high low is not usually considered, because if you consider high price or low price or opening price or closing, or the just a closing price, then it is essentially, it has an effect of the volatility which may not be observed. So sometimes, when the market opens, the prices are essentially highly volatile. So to avoid all those things, we kind of take the adjusted closing price. Okay, so that's a standard practice in the empirical finance. Now, for the same days, remember that we also need if we are using the market model to estimate the abnormal return, then we also need the market, right, in which this particular stock is being traded. So for this, I have selected the market, which is essentially the Nifty 50. Okay. Now I can select the Sensex also here, but I've just kind of selected the Nifty 50 just for the essentially presentation of the session. Okay. So you can easily change it and work around it. So that's not a problem, because Yes Bank is listed on both Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange. So I have taken Nifty 50 index values on the same trading days with respect to the Yes Bank trading. Okay, so now here is one key that we have to understand, that the event study is based upon the trading days, not on the calendar days. Okay, so whenever there is a trading, that is considered as one day. Okay, so I have to be sure that these dates are exactly matching. Okay, so you have to run a basic test. I have kind of run a basic test to find out if there are gaps in the trade with respect to the Yes Bank, and then I need to address those. Okay, so one way to address is, in my data, the Yes Bank is a highly liquid stock, so you will see that there is no gap in the trading for Yes Bank. Okay, but you could have in your sample the firms which are infrequently traded. Okay, so when you define the market data is available on every trading day. So with respect to that trading day, you can easily identify the gaps. Now, one way to address the infrequent trading in event study analysis is account for essentially that infrequent trading. Okay, and there is a seminal paper by Dibson in 1979 who gives a way to kind of adjust for the non-synchronous trading or infrequent trading with respect to the stocks where the infrequent trading is happening. So if your sample is suffering from infrequent trading, then you have to adjust the stock prices, and it's a very simple adjustment in terms of the volatility, because what will affect if there is no continuous trading is essentially the volatility of the stock. Okay, so the adjustment is in terms of the volatility in the form of simple simple, instead of running OLS, you will run essentially WLS. Okay, so to account for that, but you can see that, but that's kind of, these are all variations that you can specific to the sample design. Okay, in my sample today, we do not have the problem of infrequent trading, right? Now, just for the for the sake of understanding how the stock prices have moved over a period of time for Yes Bank, I've just plotted it, and you can see that and it's a Yes Bank, so it has a classic, it is a fall from when Yes Bank picked up quite nicely when it started being a private bank. Its performance was outstanding, right? But with the lot of issues it started facing since between 2014 and 19, and there were governance issues mostly, and the bank suffered a significant price fall. Now, we are not conducting the event study because we want to understand the fall in the price. Now, this could be natural, this could be perfectly all right in the stock market, because these are like this just indicates that the the valuation of the firm, or the security is essentially adjusting according to the its true value. So price fall is absolutely fine. But event study allows us to essentially look at the investor reaction or the market reaction in general with respect to a particular announcement that is significant effect on its stock price or overall valuation, right? So if there is an announcement which might affect the firm structurally, then we want to consider that, right? Because going forward, that would bring a significant changes, right? So not just valuation that is driven because of the poor performance, right? So that is okay in the market, but that when the sudden information comes to which the investors are likely to react, that is the event, that is considered as an event. Okay, so identification of event is absolutely you have to be very careful about the choice of the event that you consider. Now, the other point that I want to tell you is, as you can see that this this price fall, is kind of, it's falling significantly. So there's no sudden jumps in terms of price again reaching nearly 300 and then coming down. It's not like that. So it has kind of been steady in terms of its fall. So by focusing on this time period is kind of okay, because it is reaching towards some equilibrium, which is a new equilibrium. So we can essentially, within this range, we can essentially kind of find out the investor reaction to the significant announcements. Now, for demonstration of event study, what I've selected is my announcement is happening on essentially, there were a lot of announcements, but I have kind of I have not stick to those announcements. They were mainly in 2019, so I've kept it out, but I'm focusing on a very quite recent announcement, which was on 13th March 2020. On 13th March 2020, there was a notification by the Bombay Stock Exchange that Yes Bank will be removed from all the BSE indices. Okay. Now, because it had a very high market cap and it was representing a good form and a liquid form, Yes Bank was included in the major BSE indices. Okay. So 13th March was the day when it was announced by the stock exchange that it will be removed. Now, the stock addition and removal from the indices is a big announcement, right? So it gives it gives a very big information to the investor about a lot of things, right? Why a stock, that is, if you study the literature about why a stock gets included in an index based on continuous trading, and pretty much it, because the index represents the market, right? So the stock which is highly volatile and which has lots of governance issue, structural problem, they are mostly not included. So these, you can replicate this same study for the announcement when the Yes Bank was included in the major indices as well. So you can see that what happens at that time. So stock inclusion and exclusion, they're pretty common set of announcement for the event study literature. Okay, so we are considering on this date. Now, naturally, you see that the price actually, from 25, it rose to 25.55, and then it started, increasing and then decreasing. But that's not the point. What we want to see is essentially, whether the market reacted to it. So whether any change in the price was abnormal, okay, or was it normal? Okay, so whether the abnormal return was significantly different from zero or not, right? So if it is significantly different from zero, then market is either overreacting or underreacting, right? So depending on the sign of the abnormal return. Now, why this is essentially important is in a larger context is because if you use that value and multiply it with essentially the number of shares, and overall value will tell you that how much value was lost with respect to that stock and how much value was lost from the market if there is a sudden negative reaction, or how much value was created in the market for, even if it is a short run, how much value was created for this with respect to this information. So basically, investors, by reacting to that information, becomes either they become wealthy or they become poor, right? And it's a value loss or value gain to the market as well. So the shareholder wealth implication is one of the reasons that people look at the event study analysis. So you can actually look at the economic value of it and then have the interpretation. Okay, so far so good. Any questions at this point in time? No questions? Okay.
Ma'am, just one query.
Hmm.
Do we need to keep equal number of observations for this cutoff point? Like whenever we are defining that this was a this was a day on which this event has happened. So do we need to keep equal observations before that and after that?
Did you attend the last session?
Ma'am, there were connectivity issues, so I was not able to follow everything.
Yes. So that is the issue here. So there is nothing like equal observation. All you have to define an event window and estimation window. That I'm coming to. So there is not such thing actually in the event study. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So it depends on how many days after the event it all to look at. So it all depends on that. Now, preparing the data. Okay. So this sheet is essentially, so I come to the data sheet where I have prepared the data. And now you see that I have the dates, I have the Yes Bank closing prices, Nifty closing, and then from the column D, I am essentially calculating the returns. Now these are the prices, right? Now first thing I have to calculate is the return, both stock return as well as the market return. Okay. Then in column F, I am defining, essentially, I'm just indicating the days prior to the event. Why I'm doing that? Because I know that I have to define the estimation window, which has to be minimum 150 or 120 to 150 days. And I have to, I want to see how many days in before the event I can go up to, right? So this is essentially just an indicator, and then based on that, I will decide whether these days of observations are included in the estimation window or not. Okay, now that is the first part of the answer to your question, Mr. Prashant Sharma, right? So that is essentially the first step, that with respect to the event, we will define the estimation window. And just to maintain the law of large numbers, and we don't want to get into the problem of small sample and all. After all, these are stock prices, you can go as much as possible in the time, but make sure that you don't go so much backwards that there are other events which start coming into affecting it. So we don't want to do that. So 120 days are good enough. Okay, so max you can go to 150 days. You can play around with all those things, right? So what I do is essentially so first things first. So what is this return? These are all log returns. Okay, straight away log of ratio of essentially today's price divided by yesterday's price. Okay, similarly, the market return. So no issues here. Then I come to my announcement date, which is essentially this 13th March. Right? So I'm just going to highlight it. Right? Now, what do? I have marked it as 0 because this is my event window. Right? Now, I can essentially, for just to eyeball the data, you can actually plot it with respect to the days prior to the event and you can see, but that is not meaningful because, just plotting the prices is not that meaningful. It will tell you that, okay, what's the trend in the stock price, but what we are interested into is the plotting of essentially the abnormal return, how quickly it is coming back to normal or the equilibrium situation, whatever the new equilibrium. So this is essentially my event day, which is 0. Now from any days before the event are all, I have to decide from there the estimation day, the days in the estimation window. And after that, I have all these positive days. Okay, so these are all the after event, it will form my event window. Okay, it will form a part of my event window. I'll come to that. Okay, now how do I include the observations in my estimation window? So what I've done is, typically that event window is you want to see the effect of that event, plus minus the day of the event, of course, then plus minus 1 day, plus minus 2 days, plus minus 3 days, 5 days, up to 5 or up to 10 days. Usually we see the effect 10 days around the event. So you leave 10 days. Okay, so after 10 days before the event, you start the estimation window. Okay, so you see that on the 10th day observation before the event, I have kept as it is not included in the estimation window. Why? Because this is also, I want to consider it as a part of event window. So there should not be any overlapping. I cannot estimate the normal performance based on which is the time period which could be affected by the event itself, right? So we don't want to take it. And usually what we do is, just, to be on the safer side, leave 2 3 more days and then also you can start your estimation window. Okay, so that's fine, you can play around with it and then see how it is affecting. Okay, so what I have done is that I want to consider max up to 10 days and then I want to start my estimation window. Okay, so from minus 11 I have the estimation window and I want, say, 120 days of observation, right? So I go up to essentially minus 130, right? So minus 130 plus 10 is minus 120, right? So 120 days of observations from the 10 days prior to the event. Okay, that forms my estimation window. Okay, so I say up to yes here. I can go, here this is 150 days. Okay, so I've increased the yes. I just to show you that, you can increase, otherwise you can have the 120 days also. So now this is more days. So let me just reduce it. Yeah, say 120 days. Okay, rest of the things I don't want, but they are there, but we don't want to use. Now one thing is, you should always if you're sure that there is no other event around this time, then you can increase your estimation window from 120 days to, say, 150 days. Okay, let's say whatever, one 10 more days we had. Okay, so 150 days, just you select. Okay, so that is essentially, so I know that this forms, so I'm just going to highlight that this forms my estimation window. So what I do is I'll just kind of highlight it so that when you're picking up on this, you can, because of the highlight, you can pick up very quickly. Okay, so far so good. Now, so for the event study, now I have the next worksheet where I'm preparing for the event study, and I will have all my results over there. So what I do is essentially, prepare kind of a format, okay, for the collection of all the things that I need. So the first thing that I need is essentially the to describe the event, right? So this is essentially the event window. Okay, so T is my essentially indicates the pointer for event window. So I have kept the event window, maximum length of the event window is from -10 to +10. Okay, so 10 days prior to the event, 10 days after the event. Okay, now that's a standard practice. You don't really want to go much higher, because that then it doesn't make sense. Right? Because that then it's not instantaneous reaction, right? It's like something else is playing a role. Okay, because then people, even the management will start making certain changes with respect to the new announcement, and then it will try to make positive changes so that the form valuation gets better. So all that adds up in terms of the time. So we don't really go beyond 10 days in the event study analysis. Now, so I just kind of have the date up to 10 days prior and 10 days after the event. Then column B is essentially form. So this is a basic data because this is a presentation, right? So this comes from a sheet which is titled as event data. Okay. Now here you can list all the sample forms and their respective markets. Okay, for the presentation of your analysis. Okay, so all I say is equal to, I go to the basic data sheet and I say, okay, this is my form. Okay, now what is the market reference? I know I have listed. Again, I go to event data and I say this is my market reference, Nifty. Okay, estimation window length, and I've kind of put it already there. I say okay, I say 150 days, then I say 150. Now we have changed it to 130. I will put 130. Okay, so you'll see that 130 days, right? Pointer to the end of estimation window. What is this? That is essentially when I stop. So that is, again, I have listed it as 10. So I stop, before the 10th day. That's it. Now I end of the event window. That is same as essentially the 10 days, right? So I can say that, I can just say 10. Okay, this is the date. So I will just copy from here. So this is the format. Okay, this is the date of the, okay, sorry. So this is essentially when does my event window ends. It is essentially the 10th day. So I want to convert, I don't want the date, I want the length of event window. Okay, and I say maximum length. So just for the record, I say maximum is 10. I just say that, okay, I want this format. Okay, it's just a number, just for the reference. Okay, now what do we need to do is essentially we need to estimate the abnormal return. Okay, so I should have my intercept alpha, beta. Then I should have for the essentially, so this is root mean square error, right? Which is essentially the for the test statistics, right? Then I have the observed return. Using observed return, I will calculate the abnormal return, which is essentially the difference between observed return and estimated return. Okay, so first things first. Now go back to the data. Okay, here we will essentially estimate the market model. Okay, and that market model is a simple OLS regression, which is a form level. So for every form, we need to have the abnormal return. Okay, so in this event study, we have only one form. So we will essentially run the regression. So in Excel, simple way to run the regression is go to data analysis. And it's a simple OLS regression, nothing fancy about it. Okay, so input Y range is essentially the form returns, right, over the estimation window. That's why I highlighted, so I can easily pick it up. All my yellow highlights. Then input X range is market index. Again, I just focus on my highlighted portion. Okay. So then I don't want constant to be 0. I need an intercept, so I don't have to do anything else. Okay, output range, I just say that, yes, you give me the output here only. Just do, so that we can copy and paste. Or I can copy there also, but let's copy paste here. Yeah. So this is essentially my regression. So you can say that this is R square, and as long as R square is not negative, you're fine. Don't really have to worry about R square because this will change. I mean, depending on what estimation window you're looking at. Okay, so all these numbers are there. Now I can go back to event study worksheet. What is my alpha? Alpha is my intercept equal to, so again I go to the data, which is intercept, pick up the intercept. Then this is beta. Beta is nothing but the slope. Yeah. Then this is essentially the root mean square error, right? So standard deviation, which is here. Okay. So far, I got all the parameters of the estimation. Okay, so these are all coefficients I have got, alpha, beta, and I got the standard error. So that then I have a list of actual returns. So that I have already highlighted for, plus and minus 10 days. So all I do is, simply copy paste. Because for those days only, for event days, around the event days, in the event window, I have to calculate the abnormal return using the estimation window, right? So estimation window essentially helps us to define a normal performance, right? So this is essentially minus 10 to plus 10. I'm just going to pick up these values. Just paste special because I have a formula over there, so just values, right? Okay. Now estimated return is essentially, so you can see that it is all filled up. Yeah. So estimated return is essentially alpha plus beta times essentially the market return on those days, right? So with respect to minus 10 is essentially this, right? So E246 is the market return on the minus 10th day, right? So, okay. So that's my estimated return. Clearly, you can see that, what is estimated is this, but what you saw, what the actual return is this. So there are certain differences, which is fine. Okay, so I'm just going to drag it. So I'm going to fix this formula. Okay. And right. Then I calculate the abnormal return, which is simply the difference between actual return and the estimated return. That's your error term, essentially. Okay, now I have the plot over there because that's the template. So you see, now all I did was I have just plotted it because I wanted to see how the abnormal return around the event window is acting up, right? So of course there was a drop, abnormal drop here before the event on, looks like on the 5th day prior to the event. Okay, this could be something else or some other announcement, we don't know, but there is no overlapping announcements. Okay, and so you have to be careful that there should not be a lot of important announcements at that point in time. So what you can do is essentially, this could be an indication. You can change your event day to say, this particular day, which is the -5th as in it looks like that 13 minus 5 days, right? So around 6th or around 6th of March or something. So you can or maybe before that. So you can change it and you can see. Okay, but what I see is essentially what I want to show is this is the kind of the reaction to the stock price with respect to the event. Now event is here 0, right? So following the event there was a positive reaction, okay, but this is temporary positive reaction, and that starts dying down, right? And slowly it reaches the essentially the basically the normal performance, because if the market comes back in the equilibrium, in the sense that if the markets are efficient, then this information will be eventually incorporated into the prices, and the market should not see any abnormal return. So the abnormal return essentially dies, right? So it becomes 0, right? Here it may be, we have to check for the significance, but it looks like that it is significantly different from 0, but then it starts kind of dying down, right? So over a period of time. So this is perfectly all right. So this indicates that there is some initial reaction to the announcement made by the BSE that the stock that the Yes Bank will be excluded from all the major indices. Now, to check for the significance, we need to calculate the T value. Now, this is only one form, so we can calculate, we can run a simple t-test, and just based on essentially the parametric test. We don't have to worry about the non-parametric at that point in time, but you can actually apply the non-parametric like sign test and rank test. You can apply that also, but just to give you a simple way to test it. So what's the t value for the what's the t statistic for the underlying value? How do you do that, right? So what's it, what's the, how do we calculate the t value? Tell me while I get some water. T value is essentially the test statistic divided by the standard error, right? So standard error is root mean square error, right? So that's essentially okay. So with respect to each day's abnormal return, we calculate the t statistic. Okay. Now you can clearly see that on the event day, the abnormal return is not significant, but immediately after the event, it is significant for at least 3 days. Okay. So this is essentially, this is the t-test on the abnormal return. Following up with this, what we do is essentially we calculate the cumulative abnormal return, right? You want to see that whether the abnormal return is essentially this overreaction or underreaction, whatever is there, is kind of, if you accumulate it around the event. And why do we accumulate it around the event? Because sometimes the anticipation effect also plays a role, right? So we don't want to have essentially the effect that the news might have been expected by the market participants. Okay, it might have been building up over a period of time, right, over a few days of time. So what we do is instead we essentially along with testing the significance of individual days in the event window abnormal return, we also test the significance of cumulative abnormal return. Okay. Now, for a single stock, cumulative abnormal return is essentially calculated as the sum of abnormal return over different event windows. Okay. So here you see the first abnormal, the cumulative abnormal return I am calculating is over 3 days around the event, right? Including the event day, which is -1 to +1, including the day of the event. Okay. So the total number of days is essentially -1, 0, +1, right? So 3 days. So what I do is I calculate, and we also calculate the essentially the test t value for the cumulative abnormal return statistics to check for its significance. Now, how do we do that? Let me just first do that. Okay, so +1 to -1 to +1, right? So all I have to do is sum of, this is nothing but sum of abnormal return over days. Okay, so this is my 3 days. Okay, so this is a cumulative abnormal return. What is a standard deviation? So standard deviation again has to be from the estimation window, but because you are essentially looking at a event window, it is essentially the square root of length of the event window times the standard deviation of the abnormal returns. So this is essentially, already you have the mean square root error times SQRT. The length of the event window is 3 here. Okay. Then take a division, calculate the statistics. This is significant, right? So instant reaction around the event is essentially significant. Okay, that is quite anticipated and expected. That's fairly okay. But then we want to also check how far, how quickly it dies down. So it doesn't, the effect of the information doesn't die down immediately. That means, in other words, the information is not incorporated into the new prices after 1 day. Okay, so let's take the same thing we do for ±5 days. You can do it for ±2 days, ±3, plus minus. So these are all standard. You can see when it dies down, right? So ±5 days. So let's see. So this is essentially, we have to, sorry. Yeah, I'm just going to change. Right. So these are essentially 5 days. So 5 days prior, right? So and 5 days after, right? So this is essentially the 11-day window that we have. 8, cell number 8 to 18, right? So similarly, we can essentially calculate the standard deviation, which is essentially root mean square error times SQRT. Here the length is 11 days, right? So 10 plus day of event. And then calculate the test statistic. This is also significant, right? The event study, so the cumulative abnormal return is around the event, doesn't die down even. Now we move on to essentially 10 days. So all these 10 days. Times SQRT 21. Right. Now here you have insignificant, right? So it doesn't affect it from the efficient markets, that the effect of the information should not be visible in the form of abnormal return forever. Okay, so eventually abnormal return has to be 0. So here you see that the cumulative abnormal return is not significantly different from 0. So now the null hypothesis here is that the cumulative abnormal return is 0, right? So you, for the first two windows, you reject the null hypothesis, but when you extend the window further, so minus 10 cumulative abnormal return minus 10 to plus 10 is essentially you reject the null hypothesis. Sorry, you don't reject the null hypothesis. Cumulative abnormal return is not significantly different from zero. Okay. So these are essentially, this is the way that the event study analysis is being done. Now, when you extend this, now there are certain variations. Okay, so here I have shown you the simple statistics like the cumulative abnormal return and abnormal return. You can have essentially those buy hold abnormal return, right? So buy and hold abnormal return where you take the product of the return and the expected return, right? Instead of just simply taking a kind of taking the return as such, right? So those are the variations and the updations that you can do and check your results. But event study is kind of this is the overall framework of the event study. Now, what are the possible extensions is essentially that you will have a sample. Consider having a sample of all the firms which have been excluded from the indices, right? So the major index. So let's say, the BSE's major index is say Sensex, correct? So what you can do is you can say that I want to have a sample of firms who have been excluded from Sensex over a period of time, right? So then you will have n firms and you will have different event day with respect to these n firms, but in terms of your setup it will be same, right? So whatever you define as 0 as the event day, you're going to accumulate it and observe the abnormal return, estimate the abnormal return for around 10 days plus and minus 10 days, right? So you can essentially further generalize it. That's a sample study. So in the sample study, when you extend this to a sample of forms, instead of having one form, same thing you will repeat for say those n forms. Okay, and then you will accumulate all the abnormal returns for all these sample forms. Then you will calculate the average abnormal return because it's about the sample then, right? So you will calculate the average abnormal return and you will calculate the cumulative average abnormal return. Okay.
Ma'am,
So,
ma'am,
and you further you will essentially calculate the test statistics based on those average numbers because they will be the sample statistic. Okay, so from one form you have to essentially move to a sample statistic. Now these things will be much easier to if you are using a software package like SAS or Stata or R. Okay, because this repetition will become easy instead of me having say 100 of Excel files. We usually use the Stata, which is easy and it has a module also. So once you are in that environment, it will help you to, there are standard the statistics tests are there, right? So the Patel test is there, rank test is there, sign test is there. So it is all inbuilt in the Stata. So you can actually, instead of, me calculating it manually, you actually will be able to run those tests straightforward. Okay, so that's essentially the advantage. But this can be easily extend to any sample sample event study analysis. So similarly, you can extend it to a set of forms where if you are able to identify perfect treatment and control groups, and there is a way to identify treatment and control groups in econometrics. So if you can apply that, then you will essentially you will, instead of checking the significance from 0, you will essentially test for the significance between the difference in the values of cumulative average abnormal return between the treatment or the control sample. Okay, so those are essentially the extension you will have to use when you are transforming this one single form to a sample event study analysis.